All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate your attention and your interest in this. Today's topic: transitioning through menopause gracefully. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, for those of you who don't know me or haven't joined us before, my name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a pharmacist that practices holistic pharmacy in my wellness center, which is outside of Baltimore in an area called Hunt Valley. And so I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist and used to have my own stores and stand behind the counter doing that count, pour, lick, stick, type, and gripe thing that pharmacists do. And don't do that anymore because after a while of being in my practice, of having been in my practice, I wanted to evaluate how well I was really helping my patients and customers and realized that in giving them those prescription medicines, I really wasn't helping them. All we were doing with those medicines are turning down the volume of what the body's saying. And there's a different approach to health, and that is to really listen to what the body's saying. And so when you have some sort of chronic issue, whether it's high blood pressure or diabetes or cholesterol or osteoporosis, those really aren't diseases. I know that's what we think about them here in our society, but those really are not diseases. What those really are just very intense ways that your body's talking to you, trying to say that something is out of balance. And if we would just listen to what the body's saying, figure out what's out of balance and fix that, then we can have those problems go away. And I have a bunch of patients who walk around saying, I used to be hypertensive or diabetic or osteoporotic or depressed or whatever, and that they're not those things anymore. And so, um, same thing with menopause, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. I also want to make sure everybody understands that I am here at your disposal. Part of my mission in life and part of my mission with the work that I do is to act as a resource for people. And so please do not hesitate to call me or contact me. Um, you can get all of my information, my contact information from the website, which is wellbeinggps.com, your navigation tool to being well. And I will respond to you, I promise, and hopefully be able to answer your questions for you. Also, love comments and feedback about this process of educating people through these webinars. I love this medium because it gives me the opportunity to interact with people from all over the place. I see that we have people here from the Colorado area, from the Baltimore area, and love to be able to communicate worldwide. Also, want to point out a couple other things. One, all of the webinars that we do get recorded and put on our website in an archive, and so we have a lot of past webinars: vitamin D, the flu, inflammation, osteoporosis, stress, sleep, sports nutrition, whole bunch of titles, and they're all on there. And this one will be on there as well come Monday or Tuesday. So if you find this information useful and you want to share it with somebody, just send them to the website and they can listen to it in entirety with the PowerPoint presentation, little YouTube video that we have there, and any of those past ones as well. Also, lots of good resources on the website, articles, health protocols, etc. Also, a little special hello. I see that we have Cheryl on with us as well. And so I want to wish Cheryl a very happy birthday. Her birthday is coming up this weekend, I believe. And I'm not going to say how old she is, but I am going to say that it's a good thing that she's listening to this webinar today. So also want to say that this is an interactive webinar. And although I don't have your ability turned on to talk to me because we have so many people on that it gets really dicey when people are talking, all at the same time, you have the opportunity to type questions to me, and you can do that anytime you want during the webinar. And if it's something that I just said that you have a question about, just type in that question. I see it pop up on my screen, and I will address it when it's appropriate to do so. So if it's something I just mentioned needs a clarification, I'll do that right then and there. And if not, if it's something that's going to be addressed later, I will address it later. And Cheryl just typed me a nice little note. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, so let's get started. Today, transitioning through menopause gracefully. I did this webinar again live last Tuesday evening, had a great crowd and a great webinar, and it went long. I mean, we actually were on for about an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm going to try to abbreviate that a little bit as well. And again, don't be shy about typing in your questions because I want to make sure that that I'm addressing what's important to you. So let's go ahead and get started with this. I want to start off with just a quick definition of what menopause is. Now, according to medicine, you are officially through menopause, meaning that you are done with your periods if you've gone through 12 consecutive months without having a menstrual cycle. And this usually happens somewhere between the age of 40 to 60. Average here in this country is around 51 years old. That average may be different in different countries depending on nutritional factors, lifestyle, genetic factors as well. Just some interesting statistics that I think is important to bear in mind as we go through time. And number one is that by the year 2015, nearly 50% of the women on this planet will be menopausal, meaning that they'll be through menopause, not getting their periods anymore. And of course, that is representative of that big lump of population that's going through time that we call baby boomers. And I just think that's real interesting. And that will have ramifications on all sorts of things in this world, including commerce, including health and behavior. The other thing is that today women can expect to live a full 1/3 of their life past menopause, and that again is the first time that's happened in the in the history of humankind. That has to do with us having a longer lifespan. What does premenopause mean? You'll hear that that term bandied about. You may be in your late 40s, and you go to your doctor. Doctor says, "Oh, you're premenopausal." Well, really, it just means that it's the time leading up to menopause, and it's marked by changes in your menstrual cycle. And it's interesting because those changes can be anything. It can be shortening or lengthening. It could be more or less blood flow. But it is definitely irregular periods, and that's how you know you're sort of going through a change or a cycle. Perimenopause is another term that you'll hear bandied about, and it basically is just talking about the transition years, the same thing. Premenopause, perimenopause, pretty much the same thing. So what does going through menopause really mean? Well, it means that it's the end of your reproductive abilities. It's the end of a woman's reproductive abilities. And I want to point out that nature is very unemotional about this. Once you're no longer able to reproduce, meaning that you can't further the species along, nature has a different use for you if it has a use for you at all. Now, humans are one of only a very few animals on this entire, in the entire animal kingdom that actually live past their reproductive years. And so natural selection may have figured into that because humans take much longer to develop from little babies into viable, survivable adults. And so you need mom to be around longer and grandmother to be around longer as well than in most other species. But you also have to understand that when you are done with your reproductive abilities, from nature's perspective, which again is very unemotional about this, you're fighting against the tide because in essence, what nature wants to do is just kind of fatten you up for the rest of us for when you're gone. And so you're automatically fighting against a little bit of a tide of body fat and health, health issues. What about surgical menopause? Now, surgical menopause is really nothing more than a premature signal to nature that you're no longer viably reproductive. And so that signal to nature, which of course our hormones play a big role in, is basically just telling nature a little bit earlier, or maybe a lot earlier, depending, that you're done reproducing. And again, those same changes will have the tendency to happen, that tide that you're sort of fighting against. And surgical menopause can happen actually because of surgeries, it can happen because of prescription medicines, it can happen because of certain physical ailments or conditions that can lead to that as well. Just a little background here. So let's take a look at the hormones because I think it's really important to understand the background. If we're going to address going through menopause differently, we have to understand the whole biochemical background here. And this is where this is the part of the program where I usually apologize for getting too much into the biochemistry. I don't know it's possible to get too much into the biochemistry, but I am a sort of a biochemical nerd. I find this stuff very interesting, and I find it very useful for us to understand. Hopefully, I'm able to distill this down into a way that's easy enough to understand for you. So let's take a look at the hormones. So it's all about balance, and the balance is between two very important hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So let's take a look at what happens with a normal menstrual cycle because it's the interruption of that menstrual cycle that that happens with menopause that leads to all of the potential symptoms that you can get. So this is a little graph that shows you what's happening with your hormones. Hopefully you can see my little cursor here. So you have estrogen levels which go up, and sort of peak at around halfway through your cycle. That's what sort of causes the release of an egg from your ovaries. And then the estrogen levels go back down. And progesterone levels around the middle of your cycle start to go up. And that's what sort of prepares the lining of your uterus for the implantation of that fertilized egg. And then if that implantation doesn't happen, the progesterone levels go down, and then you slough the lining of the of your uterus, and that's what a menstrual cycle is, the sloughing of that lining. That lasts for 4 or 5 days, and then you start the process all over again. You'll also see that there's a couple other hormones in here. One of them is called follicle stimulating hormone that spikes a little bit right in the middle. That's what causes the release of that egg. And luteinizing hormone, which is another, plays another role with that. And in menopause or going into menopause, those are the kinds of hormones that your doctor may want to measure in blood tests or saliva tests, which then signals or shows where you are in your cycle or where you are in menopause at all. So what's important to understand is that an imbalance before menopause is what makes this transition worse or less comfortable. And this is the reason why. When you go into menopause, what happens is you have a sudden, drastic drop in your estrogen. Basically, your body says, okay, we're not going to reproduce anymore. We don't need to stimulate the release of those eggs, and estrogen levels drop. And when estrogen levels drop, that's what causes symptoms. Now, when it's a more, when it's a bigger drop, you get more symptoms. And so the bigger imbalance before is what leads to the bigger quote unquote shock to the system afterwards because of that drop in estrogen. And the reason that happens is because we have too much estrogen. Many women, when they have imbalances, have too much estrogen. Their estrogen levels are higher than nature intended them. There's various reasons why that happens. I'll go over those reasons in the next slide. But understand that if your starting point with your estrogen levels and your body has gotten used to a certain level of estrogen, then when you go through menopause and you have that drop, it's a bigger relative drop. You're starting from a higher point and then you drop. And that's what causes all the symptoms. The reason that we look at women in the United States and how they have less graceful menopause or more troublesome menopause than, say, women in the Orient is because women in the Orient, many, although this is starting to change now, don't live a Western kind of lifestyle, which can lead to higher levels of estrogen, which I'll explain in a second. And because of that, the drop is bigger in us. The relative change in women in the United States or Western cultures is bigger. And that's why we suffer more from those symptoms, because it's more of a quote unquote shock to the system. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So what can contribute to these imbalances? Well, there's two ways. There's two sides of this. First of all, there's estrogen, and there's estrogen dominance, which is too much estrogen. And then there's progesterone, and you can have low levels of progesterone. So estrogen and progesterone are supposed to be at a certain level in a balance. And if you're out of balance, it could be because the estrogen's too high or progesterone's too low, or a combination of those things. So what leads to estrogen dominance or too much estrogen? Well, first of all, there's a genetic tendency towards this. There are some people who are genetically geared to have higher levels of estrogen or have this imbalance. And so family members that moms, grandmoms, moms, daughters all have a tendency to have troublesome periods or menstrual cycles and go through menopause early or have harder problems with menopause. Part of that can be genetic. Fat cells. Fat cells are estrogen producing cells. It's not just your ovaries that make estrogen. Fat cells make estrogen also, as well as some other cells in your body. But if you have excess fat cells, then you can have excess estrogen. You can make too much estrogen. Xenoestrogens, that's with an X here. And what that means is estrogen-like compounds from the outside world. So plastics, colorings, flavorings, preservatives, all of those things are estrogen-like compounds. And what that means is the body absorbs these compounds. They look like estrogen. They act like estrogen on receptor sites, but the body can't get rid of them the way it breaks down estrogen normally. And so these are not just estrogens from the outside world or estrogen-like compounds, but they're long-lasting super estrogens. They overstimulate, and the body has a harder time getting rid of them. So again, any sort of, food additive, any sort of preservative, colorings, flavorings, are oftentimes estrogen-like compounds. Pesticides that we use on our plants are estrogen-like compounds. Plastics, estrogen-like compounds. So when you're drinking water out of a plastic bottle, Well, depending on how long that water has been in that bottle and how much heat that bottle has gotten exposed to, some of the plastics actually leach into the water. Then when you drink the water, it gets into your system, and that's an estrogen or a xenoestrogen. Same thing when you microwave in plastics. So that's one of the dangers of microwaving in plastics. And then the fourth thing is liver function. And this is because it's the liver that's responsible for breaking estrogen down from one estrogen to another and eventually for the body getting rid of it. And so even just with normal estrogens, if liver is not able to do its job properly, then you have estrogens hanging around longer than they should, and that leads to an imbalance of too much estrogen, also known as estrogen dominance. There's also low progesterone, and that can happen for a couple reasons. The biggest reason is stress and adrenal function. When we're under stress, our body uses progesterone to make cortisol. And this next slide shows sort of the pathway here. And so, again, apologize for the biochemical part of this, but I think it's important to understand. Cholesterol is made by your liver, and it gets changed into pregnenolone. It gets changed to some other hormones, and eventually gets changed to progesterone. And you'll see here that progesterone can go to cortisol, or it can go to androstenedione, which eventually leads to the estrogens and testosterone. So if you're under stress, you're constantly shunting your progesterone into cortisol, and that lowers your progesterone level. And that is far and away one of the biggest reasons why we could have low progesterone problems. And that can show up in lots of different ways. And so as you're younger and you're getting older, your cycles, if they're uncomfortable, PMS symptoms, irregularity in your cycles, not getting your cycle, not being able to get pregnant, not being able to hold on to pregnancies, all those are related to low progesterone levels. And in my patient population, the women that I work with, where we start to put some attention to their adrenals, we see their progesterone level come up, and then those things start to go away. And it's the same thing. All of this stuff before you go through menopause makes the symptoms of menopause worse. And so if you're listening now and you haven't been through menopause yet, or you're starting to go through menopause, you're in that premenopausal or perimenopausal area, take care of this now. And you will find that as you go through menopause, the symptoms are much, much less. Okay? So what are the effects of stress on hormonal balance? Well, there are direct effects and there are indirect effects. The direct effects are, as I just mentioned, using up materials. Progesterone, you're constantly shifting progesterone into cortisol, which lowers your progesterone levels in effect. The indirect effects are that increases your sugar. Well, when you increase in sugar, what does that mean you do? Your body wants to store more of it, and the storage unit is fat. And fat cells do what? They produce estrogen. So that contributes to this estrogen dominance. When we're under stress, we have a tendency to emotional eat. Same thing, emotional eating. And inflammation, which is one of those triggers that tells the body something's not right, and it messes up all sorts of balances, including hormonal balance. So there are tissues that are sensitive to estrogen. Now, obviously, we know about estrogen being, one of the sex hormones, but it's important to point out all of the tissues that estrogen affects. And so, obviously, there's reproductive, there's urinary, there's skin, bone, vascular lining. So that has to do with the cardiovascular risks, teeth and gums, brain and central nervous system and eyes even. All of those tissues are affected by estrogen. So as your estrogen levels change, you're likely to see changes in the function of any or all of these tissues in the body. And that's why you see all the symptoms that you have because of that change, that drop in estrogen. And again, I'll point out the reason that we have a much larger problem transitioning through menopause in this country is that the relative drop in estrogen is bigger in us because our estrogen levels are higher because of those other reasons that I just went over. So let's talk about menopausal symptoms. So there are immediate ones, and there are ones that that we're concerned about more long term. The immediate ones come in different categories. So there's the vasomotor ones, and those are the things like the hot flashes and the night sweats and heart palpitations. Let me explain to you why and how that happens, because again, I think it's important to understand. Now, science is not 100% clear on this, but there's a gland in your brain that's called the hypothalamus, and that one of the purposes or one of the functions or one of the duties of the hypothalamus is to control body temperature. So when body temperature is low, the hypothalamus does what it's supposed to do to bring into action mechanisms which will raise the core temperature. One of those may be shivering. So, like when you're cold, you shiver, and shivering is actually life preserving. It's muscle cells trying to create friction, and of course, what comes from friction? Heat. And so it heats up the core body temperature. Or if you're too hot, what happens? You sweat, and that's the body's attempt to put fluid on the surface that, when evaporates, lowers the core temperature of the surface of the body. So that's the job of the hypothalamus. The reason it gets messed up with menopause and going through menopause has to do with that drastic drop in estrogen. And again, estrogen affects central nervous system and brain tissue, and that's what the hypothalamus is part of. And um, and for some reason, endorphins don't get recognized appropriately by the hypothalamus. That's what the theory is, and that'll come into play later when we talk about some solutions. There are psychological effects, and again, anybody that's been through menopause or knows anybody that has it knows about this. Can be depression, anxiety, insomnia, irritability, mood swings, memory, and concentration issues. And again, it's because of the key role that estrogen plays with brain function. And then there are some atrophic effects. And so there's vaginal dryness and there's urinary issues. And so oftentimes vaginal tissue becomes more tender and thinner, and you get urinary problems, which can result in urinary tract infections, can result in issues with elimination, with urgency and frequency, and incontinence. And then there are some long-term effects, and they have to do with cardiovascular. With we're concerned about women after menopause with their heart condition or the conditions of their heart, with osteoporosis, of course, with their the function of their structure, and women are more susceptible to osteoporosis as they get older and go through menopause. And then also vaginal atrophy, meaning that there can be some long-term effects with the tissue. So, what's medicine's approach to menopause? Well, first of all, I want to point out that medicine thinks of menopause as a disease, and it is not a disease. Now, I'm not minimizing the effects of menopause in women who have been through it or are going through it right now. It may feel like a disease, but it is not. The reason medicine looks at it as a disease is because that's how they justify treating it with medicines. I mean, that way they give it a CPT code and insurance can pay for it and you can write prescriptions for it and all this sort of stuff. And it's not a disease. It's a simple, typical phase of a woman's life, just like when you first started to have your menstrual periods, your menstrual cycles. That was another phase that you went into. And so it's just another phase of your life. And again, 1/3 of women, women can expect to live 1/3 of their life after menopause now. So it's just a phase in the middle of your life. That's all. What they want to do to fix it is to replace those hormones from the outside world. And that may sound like a good idea at first, but ultimately it turns out to not be the best idea unless anything else, and unless nothing else really helps. And so what we used to do is give people just estrogen. That started back in the 60s because some doctor wrote a book called Young Forever and really postulated this idea that estrogen is the hormone of youth, and that if you wanted to stay young forever and have nice, beautiful skin and never age, just take estrogen. And what we found through time and experience is that estrogen unopposed, meaning that estrogen without progesterone, causes a lot of risks, including cardiovascular risks and cancer risks. And so that's when we shifted from estrogen replacement therapy, ERT, to hormone replacement therapy, HRT. And then we started adding progesterone to the mix. And so then we used prescriptions like Premarin and Provera. So Premarin, I don't know if you know this, but I just want to point out that Premarin comes from pregnant horses. Pregnant mare's urine, Premarin. That's where that name comes from. And it is estrogens that come from pregnant horses. Well, you know what? Horses make different estrogens than what humans make. And so conjugated estrogens, which is what's coming from that product, are not all the same estrogens that the human body makes. And I think that's where part of the risk comes in. And it's the same thing with Provera. Provera is a progesterone analog. It is a chemically similar looking molecule, but it's not the same thing as the progesterone that your body makes. It's called medroxyprogesterone. And so that also, I think, is where some of the risks come in from using those. So if you do want to use hormones, I think it's better to use bioidentical hormones. I mean, it just makes sense to use hormones that are the exact same hormones that your body would make. And you can get those made if you need to be on hormones at all. So, what are the risks and what are the benefits? Well, it was thought that there really weren't a whole lot of risks, or that the benefits outweighed the risks, because then those benefits would be not just treating menopausal symptoms, but also helping with the cardiovascular risk and the osteoporosis risk. Well, as it turns out, with newer studies, more recent studies that have been done over the past 5 or 10 years, that sort of factored in other things, we find out that you really don't get a cardiovascular benefit from taking these hormones, and you really don't get an osteoporosis benefit from taking those hormones. The only benefit that you really get is making those symptoms go away. And if there are other ways to make those symptoms go away, or make those symptoms never happen in the first place, then it makes sense to not put yourself at risk with hormones. Hopefully that makes sense to you as well. So I want to talk just a real quick bit about the bioidentical hormones, because again, if you are going to put hormones in from the outside world, you want those hormones to be the exact same hormones that your body makes. And we don't harvest them from humans. What we do is they're made in the laboratory. That doesn't matter. They're bioidentical, the exact same hormones that your body makes, and that's what's important. So are there studies? Well, there are starting to be more studies now using bioidentical hormones, but I have to say that there aren't a lot of studies. Most of the studies that have been done have been using Premarin and Provera, or conjugated estrogens and medroxyprogesterone, instead of the bioidentical hormones. But what logic tells us is that it makes perfect sense that if you are going to put hormones in from the outside world, that you want those hormones to be the exact same hormones that your body makes, so that they can process them properly instead of have them hang around longer than nature intended. And it makes perfect sense to me. And I can say in practice that it appears that there is much less risk using bioidentical hormones if you need to do it. So, what is the holistic approach to treating menopause, or helping people transition through menopause much more gracefully? And again, I want to point out to you guys that are listening right now, don't hesitate to type in some questions if you have them. You can't just raise your hand for me, because I can't put you on speaker. So you have to type that in to the little question box there, and then I'll see it. So what is the holistic approach? Well, there's 4 pieces to it. There's diet, there's exercise, there's lifestyle considerations, and then there's supplements that you can take. And I'm going to go through each one of these individually and talk about the important, or the highlights here. And hopefully, that will make sense for you. So let's talk about diet first. So again, what happens in menopause is that there's a drop in your estrogen production. And for us women that are in the United States, the tendency is for that to be a more drastic drop, because our estrogen levels are starting at a higher point. And that can be because of stress. It can be because of estrogens from the outside world. It can be because of lack of exercise and excess body fat. Basically, because we live in a Western society, and that's what happens to us. So there are a whole bunch of foods that have what are known as phytoestrogens in them. Phytoestrogens are estrogen-like compounds that are contained in food. And the truth is that every fresh fruit and vegetable that you eat has phytoestrogens in it. Most of them very small amounts, some of them more, and I'll go into those. But every food that you eat has some estrogen-like compounds in it. Now, usually I get a question about now that says, well, wait, this is just another kind of xenoestrogen, another estrogen from the outside world. Yes and no. Yes, it is an estrogen from the outside world. No, it's not the same, because phytoestrogens in the forms that they come in foods are a form that the body knows how to get rid of and can break down efficiently, which is not the case with pesticides and colorants and flavorings and preservatives and all of that stuff. And so it's not the same. Now, what are the foods that have higher levels of phytoestrogens in it? Soy and flax seeds. What's in soy are called isoflavones, and those are phytoestrogens. What's in flaxseed is called lignans, and that's a different kind of chemical compound, but it's also a phytoestrogen. Other foods, lots of legumes, have higher amounts of phytoestrogens than everything else. But again, I just want to point out, every food has phytoestrogens in it just by itself. Because we are concerned about women's cardiovascular health, and because of the effect that estrogen has on vascular structure, once a woman is in menopause, we're concerned about eating cardiovascular healthy foods as well. And so we're talking about healthy fats, and we're talking about whole foods, the same sort of things. Healthy fats, very, very important. Fish oil, and eating foods that have, fish basically is one way to go that. And then the third thing, again, what are we concerned about with women? Osteoporosis after they go through menopause. And so osteoporosis, healthy foods. And again, whole foods have all of the minerals that you need to build bone. And it's not just calcium, it's calcium, magnesium, and boron, and strontium, and vitamin K. And so eating a variety of different foods, very, very important. And non-acidifying foods. And I will refer people here to my other webinar about osteoporosis, or the article or the health protocol about osteoporosis to understand this in more detail. But generally speaking, one of the things that leads to osteoporosis is the leaching of minerals from the bones, because our diet is too acidifying, and so we want to eat alkalinizing foods. And any whole food, any fruit or vegetable, is alkalinizing in nature. So I have a question here from Margaret, and that says, if I go to bed really late, around 2 or 3, I don't have night sweats. If I go to bed before then, I have night sweats. Why does this happen, and how can I go to sleep at 9 p.m., and not be disturbed with night sweats? And so part of that has to do with the signaling that goes along with your hormones, and actually serotonin is playing a role with this. And so when serotonin levels are lower, you have more of a tendency to have those night sweats. When you're up and about, if you stay up, you're sort of tricking your body into thinking it's daytime, and there's different levels of serotonin that can happen there. And so one of the things to do, Margaret, is actually increase your serotonin levels before you go to bed. And the way you do that is with a simple nutrient called 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan. It's the precursor to serotonin. So 50 to 100 milligrams of 5-HTP before you go to bed. You will find that as you continue to do that, that the night sweats become less and less. Also, you need to address all of these other issues that we're talking about. If there's excess body weight, then you need to, start to work off some of that excess fat. There's an issue with exercise that I'll talk about in a second. 5-HTP is completely safe to use. I use it with a lot of patients, and you have to use it in much more caution if you're on certain prescription medicines, including antidepressants. And so, it'd be good for you to give me a call to check that out, just to make sure that it would be the right thing for you, Margaret. Thanks for the call. I appreciate that. Okay, so for the question. Okay, so exercise is the next thing. Okay, so there's this hypothesis of impaired endorphin activity within the hypothalamus. That's a big fancy thing for what I told you earlier, that says that they think that you get night sweats or hot flashes because the hypothalamus is not recognizing and or reacting to endorphins the way they're supposed to. So because of that theory, somebody came up with the proposition that maybe if you exercise more and you create endorphins when you exercise, that would help fix that problem. And sure enough, it's true. So some of our friends over in Sweden did this big study, and they looked at exercise and hot flashes. And what they found basically was that women who exercise 3.5 hours a week did not have hot flashes the way that women that don't exercise do. And so this is one of those things where it's it doesn't cost you anything. There's other collateral benefits from exercising, including how your body handles sugar, which then of course lowers your fat, which also lowers the estrogen, there. And so many, many benefits, but specifically for hot flashes. Now it seems sort of counterintuitive because, when you have a hot flash, what happens is your body's overheating, but that's like a momentary thing. And so for some women that I've talked to about this, they say, I couldn't exercise. That's going to make things worse. And it's just the opposite. When you do exercise and when you do use your body in that way and you do get hot and sweaty, it actually helps to reset the hypothalamus so that it can control body temperature better throughout the day, even when you're not exercising. So it's not like, all right, I'm having a hot flash, I'm going to go exercise. It's exercise on a regular basis so that the hot flashes are less as time goes on. Very, very simple. And that would Margaret, for your question about the nighttime and the night sweats, this would be significant for you as well. I just did a webinar about sports nutrition, and I would encourage you to go and listen to that because it's tied into this in the proper way to exercise. And so when you are exercising, you want to dedicate at least half of the time that you're exercising to aerobic exercise. And within that, you want to do interval training where your heart rate and your blood pressure are going up and down within that training session, not just getting on a treadmill and going at the same rate for 30 or 40 minutes. And then the other half of the time that you have to exercise should be dedicated to building muscle. Okay, so that's the exercise issue. How about lifestyle? Well, Obviously, the first one is stress reduction, and hopefully you've gotten the message and understand about the link here, that when your progesterone levels are low, it makes all of these symptoms worse. Even when you're going through menopause, it makes these symptoms worse. And so doing things to keep your progesterone levels elevated are very, very important. And as you'll see in the supplement section, progesterone is one of the supplements that we use. Over the counter, USP, bioidentical progesterone cream, is one of the great tools that we use that help with all of these symptoms, and also helps to increase bone density, and has other good collateral benefits as well. And for Margaret, again, your question about the night sweats, if the 5-HTP wasn't working adequately after 3 or 4 weeks of trying it consistently, the next thing I would probably add to it is likely some progesterone cream before you go to bed, and you would find that that also helps you. So stress reduction. So anything that you can do. And again, exercise helps with stress reduction. Learning to interact with your environment in a different way is very, very important. I have patients all day long, and I sit down and we talk about stress, and they say it's their husbands and their wives and their parents and their children and their bosses, and they go out and get new husbands and wives and parents and children and bosses, and they end up with the same problems. And it's because it's not really the outside. It's how you're reacting to the environment that can be changed and can be worked on. And so I would definitely recommend that you take a serious look at that, especially if menopausal symptoms are a problem. This pains me every time I have to put it up on a slide. My personal feeling is, if there is anybody that doesn't understand that smoking is bad for you on all sorts of fronts, then you're living under a rock somewhere, or you are just have your head in the sand. Smoking directly related to menopausal symptoms, and women that used to smoke that stop smoking, those symptoms get better, and so you can reverse some of what happens from the smoking. But if you are smoking, then please stop. For all of us, I appreciate it. Caffeine and alcohol. Alcohol has an effect on the liver. It has effect on temperature control in the body. Caffeine has effect on the adrenals and stress, and it has effect on temperature control within the body. And so if you are having, hot flashes and night sweats, getting the caffeine and alcohol out of your system, out of your body, out of your life will play a big role in those symptoms getting better. All right, and how about supplements? Because this is really the bigger part of it, or a big part of this. And so we talked about phytoestrogens and how important those are. Adding some estrogens from the outside world. Something else I want to mention about the phytoestrogens that I just realized that I forgot, and that has to do with, usually I get questions about soy or soy isoflavones, and there's some conflicting understanding that if you have a risk of estrogen sensitive problems like cancers, like certain breast cancers, or a family history, then you can't use phytoestrogens from the outside world. And it's really not necessarily true. This is the way to think about it. You have estrogen receptor sites all over your body. They're in all sorts of tissues. All of those tissues that I mentioned have estrogen receptor sites. And so you have them in the lining of your stomach, you have them in the blood vessels, you have them in your brain, you have them in breast and uterine tissue, you have them in your bones. And estrogen comes and has an effect. For some of those, but there are different kinds of estrogen receptors. There are alpha and beta receptors, and they have different functions. And so some of those receptor sites are growth receptor sites. And so what that means is, when estrogen goes to those receptor sites and stimulates them, it stimulates growth of tissue. And that's what happens in breast tissue. So you have estrogen receptor sites within your breast tissue. And if estrogen goes and binds to that receptor site, it sends a signal that says grow these tissues. And sometimes that signal goes out of whack, and the tissues grow and grow and grow, and it turns into what we know as a cancer, which are basically tissues that just keep growing and don't, they forget to grow old and die, basically. And some of us have genetic tendencies towards that happening more than others. But it's the phytoestrogen, it's the xenoestrogens, and it's the estrogens in your body that are the super powerful estrogens that promote that growth more than others. There's a prescription medicine called tamoxifen, which is used for breast cancer. And what it does is it goes and it occupies that receptor site on breast tissue so that so estrogen can't get to it and stimulate growth. Well, phytoestrogens do the same thing. They go to those receptor sites, but they stimulate them in very, very minor amounts. It's not like the superestrogen or the xenoestrogens, but it also acts as a blocker. It stops those more powerful estrogens from being able to go there. And so that's why those are helpful for these problems. And this is why they're also helpful because of a minor stimulation of estrogen receptor sites all over your body. That's why they're helpful for menopausal symptoms as well. It helps alleviate that drastic drop in estrogen and gives your body a chance to sort of go through it a little bit. So there are some different nutrients or supplements that have these phytoestrogens in them in, sort of controlled amounts. My favorite one, without a doubt, is the top one on the list, which is called Siberian rhubarb, which is one that you probably have never heard of before. It comes from Europe. It's a patented product. Its technical name is ERR 731, and it is has been used in Europe for probably 20 years, and it's been available here in this country for 4 or 5 years now under one brand name called Estrovera by a company called Metagenics. And without a doubt, it is my favorite tool to use for menopause, for the beginnings of menopausal symptoms, or the first thing that we try. And the reason I like it is it's not overly expensive. There are no side effects. It's very convenient. It's just one tablet every morning. And I have used this in my practice for over 3 years now with excellent results, especially in the early beginning stages of menopausal symptoms. And there's no doubt that I get calls back from women often within 3 or 4 weeks saying that they're starting to notice a difference, sometimes even sooner than that. Now, they've done lots of studies with this against placebo, against black cohosh, and against hormonal treatments, and they show either superior or equal without the side effects that you can get from those other things. And so I really encourage you to try that product. If you're going to do it, be willing to give it 3 months, 12 weeks. And oftentimes I get calls back, very quickly saying that women are starting to notice a difference about that. Black cohosh is another, and this is an old standby. Again, it's a source of a different sort of phytoestrogen. It's very safe to use. There are no side effects to it. It's a little bit less convenient because you have to take more of them. Usually I'm having people take 2 or 4 capsules a day. When you're taking it, you want to make sure that it is a standardized product. You can use soy and red clover as other sources. I'm not the biggest fan of soy foods in the world. If you're going to use soy as a source of phytoestrogens to help with your menopausal symptoms, then you want to use a supplement where you know how much of the isoflavones that you're getting from the soy or the red clover. Let's see. Margaret had another question, and that is, where can I get 5-HTP? Must I have a prescription for it? Is there a natural source of 5-HTP? So 5-HTP is over the counter. You do not need a prescription for it. You can find it around. There are some quality issues with it. It actually comes from the Graphonia bean, which is grown in Western Africa or is found in Western Africa. And there are no sources of it that you're going to get just from your diet alone. You can get tryptophan from your diet alone. You can get that from animal proteins, turkey, warm milk. When you warm milk, it releases some of the tryptophan. But tryptophan, you don't get the same results that you do from 5-HTP. So I'd encourage that you buy some. You certainly could go to our website and read about it and purchase it right from there, or find it at a local, wherever you are, Margaret. So thanks for the question for that. I appreciate it. All right, second list are adaptogens. Now, these are herbs or nutrients that help support adrenal function. And again, this is important because adrenals are so important to maintaining the hormonal balance and elevating or maintaining your progesterone levels the way nature intended for you. So all sorts of herbs that are known as adaptogens, which means they pre-adapt your body to stress. Herbs like ginseng, licorice, ashwagandha, holy basil, schizandra, arctic roots. There's a whole bunch of different ones. And there are different formulas that I use. One of my favorite formulas is called Power Adapt by a company called Natura. And this is a group of a bunch of these herbs together. It's very, very effective. If you go to the website, you can read about Power Adapt. If you look at the section that talks about testimonials, you'll see that we get quite a few testimonials about Power Adapt because of what a difference that's made in people's lives, just for stress, for energy, and particularly for menopausal symptoms. Got a question from Carol here that says that you said that these supplements are most effective early. What is that? Meaning that when you first begin to get menopausal symptoms, that's when these supplements are going to be most effective. So if you've been having hot flashes and night sweats for 4 or 5 years, we oftentimes have to pull up bigger guns to treat them. It's not to say that I wouldn't start with something like Estrovera give it a chance and see if it works. But oftentimes we might start with a combination of something like Estrovera and progesterone cream or something else. But if it's the very beginning of this process, this is what helps you transition through the process easier. So that's what the early part means. Thanks for that question, Carol, and for the opportunity for me to clarify that. There's other herbs like Dong Quai or chasteberry, which have been traditionally used for menopausal symptoms, and you will oftentimes see in combination products. I have a really nice combination product that's called Fem Support. That's actually under our own label, well-being label, that has black cohosh and chasteberry and Dong Quai and some other herbs, and I get really good results with that. There doesn't seem to necessarily be any particular rhyme or reason why one may work more or better than another as far as these formulas go. And so sometimes we try, a formula knowing that it's our best chance, and if it doesn't work, we'll try another formula, and eventually we'll hit upon what actually works for you as an individual. That idea of putting hormones in from the outside world, as far as I'm concerned, is the last resort. So let's see what else. And then there's progesterone cream, as I talked about. And so again, I'm not the biggest fan of putting hormones in from the outside world. If we do have to do it, we want to make sure that it's the exact same hormones that we put in, that your body makes. And so progesterone cream has become one of my favorite tools to use for the results of stress, as well as for women that are starting to and or going through menopause and having symptoms because of that. And the reason is everything that I just went over before. The low levels of progesterone definitely contributes to the overall imbalance that makes the symptoms of menopause worse, and it is helpful with the hot flashes and the night sweats and the sleeping issues and the mood issues and the mood swings and the irritability and the vaginal dryness and all of the other things that are the common things that come along with menopause. And so there are very specific ways that we use progesterone cream depending on where you are in this process. If you are still getting your periods, although maybe even irregularly, we will have you use progesterone cream on days 14 through 28 of your cycle. Again, getting back to that screen that showed you what happens with your normal period as you go through your life, normal menstrual cycle. Progesterone levels start to go up in the middle of the cycle, and then they go down, and that's what causes your sloughing of your uterine tissue. That's what causes a period. And so we want to emulate that as much as possible. So if you're still getting your periods and or you've been irregular with your periods, you start using progesterone cream. Oftentimes this is what happens. Symptoms go away and your period comes back to normal. Now, I've had some women tell me, I don't want my period coming back. Well, this is really what nature wants for you. It's not what you want or I want. And it's better to have you go through that, that transition more the way nature intended for you. If you are not, if you're done with menopause, but you're still getting symptoms, meaning that you're not getting your period, you haven't gotten it for months and months, and you still are having symptoms, then you use it every day. At night, and it'll start to take care of those symptoms for you. If you do get your period back from that, then we start to have you use it a different way. So if you want to use progesterone cream, it is available over the counter. I recommend that you use just a few brands because we want to make sure that it's potent, that it is actually progesterone that's in there instead of wild yam, which some companies sort of try to pass off as progesterone, which it is not. And you want to be able to make sure that you're using it properly. So my preference would be to actually talk to you, have a conversation with you about that to make sure that you're using it the right way. So that's the deal with progesterone. And then the last thing, of course, is liver support. And again, for all those same reasons, your body handling estrogens properly or appropriately is very important to getting rid of symptoms. And so liver support we do in the form of certain herbs like milk thistle or artichoke or turmeric. There's lots of reasons why our livers have problems today, including all the prescription medicines and the that we're exposed to, and the things that we do that aren't good for our liver, like alcohol, and excess fat in our diet or excess unhealthy fats in our diet, and the environment that we live in and the chemicals that we're exposed to. And so there's a great product again under the well-being label that's called Milk Thistle Plus. That's a great combination of milk thistle, artichoke, and turmeric all together, and that's a great way to get some liver support if need be. So now's a good time to sort of chime in with any more questions that you may have as we're starting to wrap it up. So I just want to go over a quick synopsis. And so number one, this is a normal cycle. more and more women are going to be around as they're going through or have gone through this cycle. So it's more important to pay attention to it. And right now, women will live a third of their lives past menopause, which is a first for the species of humankind on this planet. Um, to live that long after menopause. Number two, medicine looks at this as a disease. It is not a disease. It is a cycle. Medicine wants to treat it by trying to put hormones in from the outside world, which really goes against nature. This is not what nature wants for you. What nature wants is for you to have to transition into a period where you have different kinds of hormones and want those hormones to be in balance. And so putting in those hormones from the outside world is the last resort. And if you are putting hormones in from the outside world, please make sure that they are actually the same hormones that your body makes, as opposed to hormones that come from pregnant horses or chemical analogs of hormones that do not act the same way in your body. There's all sorts of things to try to help treat these symptoms, that go through all sorts of diet, exercise, and lifestyle issues. Definitely getting exercise is important. Dietary wise, eating more fresh fruits and vegetables gives you more phytonutrients as well as phytoestrogens. It also helps to cut down on excess fat, which are estrogen producing cells. It also helps to get your liver and your adrenals to function properly. Stress is a big issue, and dealing with stress, oftentimes women report that their menopausal symptoms are worse when they're under stress, and that's what leads to that imbalance in the first place. And so looking to fix that is important. We've got a question from Wendy here. How does being on the pill change any of your suggestions? Really good question. Thank you for asking that. Oftentimes we put hormones in from the outside world as we're getting older for other reasons, either for birth control or to help to manage what were uncomfortable or painful menstrual cycles. And my experience is that when you have been putting those hormones in from the outside world for a period of time, it takes longer for your body to adjust to changes. Sometimes that is experienced as harder or negative or less graceful as you go through that period. Number one, if you are coming towards menopause, you are, in my opinion, too old to be on a birth control pill, and the risks are far outweigh the potential benefits of being on that pill. And so the older you are, the more likely you are to have negative effects from those hormones, including all of the cardiovascular issues, the throwing blood clots and strokes and the whole bit. And so as you're getting closer to menopause, I think it's less appropriate for you to be on a birth control pill. If you've been off of that pill for a while and things have sort of normalized, then you'll go through this cycle or this phase of your life, however you're going to go through it. And if there are imbalances that are there, it's going to be harder for you to go through it. And all of the things that I've talked about will affect that. There are times when a woman has been on birth control for a period of time, they come off and periods never come back, and or they have other issues, including not being able to get pregnant. And so that is an indication that it's taking your body longer to get back into the normal flow. And there are definitely some other things to do to help affect that if possible. So appreciate that. Another question. So Lauren, I'm sorry that you're having that issue. Lauren said she's having a problem where about every 5 minutes the voice is going out for 30 seconds. I think that's because you're on the phone as opposed to being on the computer. I see that Marjorie's on the phone as well and may have that issue. As I'm doing this webinar, I can see my audio and I can see that the voice is coming into the system. So I think it might have to do with actually being on the phone. I certainly do apologize for that. I think that if you were to go to the recording of the webinar, which again will be on the website by Monday or Tuesday next week, you'll find that those gaps aren't there at all and you can make up the difference for what you missed. I appreciate the question though and apologize for that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. Maybe that's not why. But no one else has reported that issue to me. So that's the presentation. I really do appreciate it. I do want to point out that we have webinars that are coming up. Next month is about a natural solution for anxiety and depression. Month after that, digestion. Month after that, insulin levels. Also want to point out that we have an archive on our website where all of our old webinars, including the ones that you see listed here and many more, are there for your listening pleasure anytime you want, 24/7. And I do appreciate referrals. So, if this information seems useful, then tell other people about it and let's spread the word. Last thing I want to mention, especially for you folks that are here in the Baltimore area, is that we've got a couple exciting things happening with well-being. One of those things being that in October, we're having an open house, and it's an open house with some talks. And the theme is, if your health were really your first priority, what would you do differently right now? And so we have a whole day's worth of talks designed to help you understand, to evaluate if your health really is your first priority, even though I have many people who tell me they are. When we evaluate what's going on in their lives, we find out that no, it is not their first priority or their second priority, and how to start to change that and the psychology that goes along with that. Another question from Margaret: how do we get in touch with you? Go to the website. You can email me, or go to the website and you can see our toll-free number to give me a call, and you can give me a call anytime, and I'm happy to talk to you, Margaret, and everybody else. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it, and look forward for having some contact with you guys in the future. Have a great day.